Brand new unit, Unit 3. So this will be the chapters 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 of your text. And we're going to start out with a presidential election. How appropriate, right? And the election that we're going to start with is the election of 1800. Election of 1800. This is really one of the, really the first election where the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party functioned as an actual national party. In the second election, the election of 1796, when John Adams went up against Thomas Jefferson, they were just kind of squaring off against one another, but it wasn't any kind of formal party association. This one is formal and it's national. Okay, so it was just like in that 1796. It's the same two guys running. You have the President of the United States, John Adams, versus Thomas Jefferson. John Adams is the Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson is the Democratic Republican. And as you should know, the Federalists were, they favored strong central government, public order, siding with the British. Whereas the Jeffersonians, or the Democratic Republicans, were kind of seen as guardians of agrarian purity, agriculture, liberty, states' rights, things of that nature. So, just like in any election, this one was also, contained a lot of mudslinging. What is mudslinging? You guys should be very familiar with this after coming out of the reign of our current president. He is an excellent mudslinger. You guys might call it throwing shade. What is that? What is mudslinging? What is it? Give me a definition.
Talking bad about someone?
Yeah, you try talking trash, okay? And there was a lot of mudslinging that occurred during this election. Especially coming from the Federalists, they really let Thomas Jefferson have it, bringing up his affair with his slave woman, Sally Heming, which was real. I wouldn't really call it an affair. Thomas Jefferson's wife had died years before. Now, Thomas Jefferson never married Sally Heming, but he did have, casual relations with her. Okay. Really up until he dies. They almost became like partners. And as you can see, there's some progeny that resulted from that. These are the ancestors of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Heming. Okay? So it's real. Okay? Biologically, that happened. And as you can imagine, that would be pretty offensive to a lot of, imagine, 1800. The level of racism that existed, imagine the racism that exists in America now. Imagine how bad it was in 1800, okay? So that was pretty damning to Thomas Jefferson's campaign. So the Federalists, they definitely concentrated their fire on Thomas Jefferson. And, they even, he became the victim of one of the earliest whispering campaigns. This is like where Thomas Jefferson was accused of having robbed a widow and her children of a trust fund. Just straight up, I'm not going to say lies, but very, very spurious in arguments. Obviously fathering numerous children with his, mulatto children with his slave women. And Sally Heming was the main focus of that. So, who wins? Who won? Thomas Jefferson won. And he won a majority of the Electoral College votes, 73 to 65. And you can see by the Electoral College map, of 1870 or 1800 here. Which states favored who? So, John Adams is defeated, and he was pretty unpopular. A lot of people didn't really care for him. But New York fell. And you look who got New York. Do you think that's interesting? Because New York's very far north. Very far north. And who else is from New York? A person that can't run for president, but is always at odds with Thomas Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton. It's kind of weird, that they did not go for John Adams because Thomas Jefferson's a big states' rights guy. He's on the the Democratic Republican side, whereas the Federalists, Alexander is a part of Alexander Hamilton, and Alexander Hamilton's from New York. So it's kind of interesting that happened. It happened largely because of a guy named Aaron Burr. You guys know who Aaron Burr is? You ever heard his name? Yeah. He turned New York to Jefferson. And, Jefferson's victory was really I want to say this correctly. His victory came in part because of the 3/5 clause. Do you guys remember the 3/5 clause in the Constitution? What's the 3/5 clause? That's right. Slaves count as 3/5 of a person, and so that makes the population in which areas higher. Where's the slaves at, guys? In the South. So for purposes of electoral college representation, Southern states are going to have higher numbers. I mean, look at Virginia. 21 electoral college votes. Can you imagine Virginia having almost double the votes of New York today? No. I mean, Virginia is a pretty big state, especially with Northern Virginia, but it was like double the size of New York. It was the largest state. And a lot of that is largely due to the 3/5 compromise. So, Thomas Jefferson faces a lot of criticism for that. They call him the Negro president, with malice intent, with to be racist against him, to be mean. Not because he's actually a black man. He's not. But that's what they referred to him as. He called him an illegitimate embodiment of slave power. So, people who talk junk about presidents is not a new thing, okay? And political parties who make fun of the other political party after they win is not a new thing either. This was going on in the election of 1800, all right? 220 years ago. The exact same stuff that's going on now was going on then, okay? So don't live in fear, all right? We've been through worse, all right? So Jeffersonian joy, they win. They definitely win, but it wasn't a straight up full out win because through a technicality, Thomas Jefferson's running mate, who was Aaron Burr, he also received the same number of electoral college votes for the presidency. And under the Constitution, a tie, because it was totally different then. It was his running mate, and he's running for vice president. So, but under the Constitution at that time, the tie could only be broken by the House of Representatives, which was full of Federalists, which was put there during John Adams and really George Washington's administrations. It was full of Federalists. And even though Aaron Burr, who himself is from New York, they preferred Thomas Jefferson because they felt like Thomas Jefferson was more competent. Like Aaron Burr was kind of a fool, incompetent. All right, so they broke the tie and chose for the moderation of Jefferson. And who do you think the person who was really on the forefront of choosing Jefferson over Burr? It was kind of surprising to Aaron Burr. It was Alexander Hamilton. So Alexander Hamilton literally costs Aaron Burr to be president of the United States at some point. How do you think Aaron Burr responds to that? Yeah, he kills him. We're going to get to that. All right, but Jefferson would later call this election, a revolution, because it's going from a federalist-led government to a Jeffersonian Democratic Republican-led government. All right. Okay, so our experiment in democracy still moving on. Still moving on. All right, so let's see here. A little bit about Jefferson himself. He was he took the office on March the 4th, 1801, on Inauguration Day, in the swampy village, now known as Washington, D.C. He was the second president to live in the White House, built by slaves, by the way. Tall, he's about 6'2", about my height. Red hair, probably a good-looking guy, right? Prominent cheekbones, chin. Let's see if we can find. Yep, there he is. That's an older Thomas Jefferson there. Jefferson's inaugural address. He was not a great public speaker. He's not known for his speaking ability. He's a writer. He's much more known for his writing ability. But his inaugural address was beautifully phrased, where he reinforces classic democratic principles, where the will of the majority in all cases to prevail. With the rustic setting of Washington, it showed the simplicity and frugality of Jeffersonians. He's a man of the people. He wants the people to be in power. The states, he's fearful of a strong central government. That's what a Democratic Republican's all about. And he wanted to set the tone that that the central government needs to be less authoritative. Okay? And so he wants to lessen the power of the president. And so he didn't ride in a carriage on his inauguration day. He walked. Okay? Previously, it was customary, Washington and Adams, they rode in a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, which that doesn't seem like a big deal to you guys, but not everybody in the world had a carriage in 1800. And so if you had a carriage, which could be pulled by horses, that was a symbol of wealth and authority and power. He said, I don't want to put forth this image. I'm going to walk. I'm just going to walk on my inauguration day. There's a parade down the street. And you'll see some presidents, I think the last president to walk on their inauguration day was George W. Bush. And it was kind of a reminiscent of Thomas Jefferson. I don't know that the Secret Service will allow anyone to walk anymore. But, he established a rule at like official dinners that there's not going to be assigned seating. Because at that time, even up until today, whenever you have a formal dinner, people the seating around the table is very important, because like whoever's at the right hand of the president, that would be like the key seat. That's the most important seat, the right hand of the. So, he would do things like, we're not going to have assigned seating. Everybody just come in and sit down, and I'll sit down in the last seat. So he would try to take some of the formality out of it. He would, whenever diplomats from foreign countries would come and visit him, it was not uncommon for him to greet them in his pajamas and slippers and not wearing his big fancy wig. Wigs were that was like the fashion statement of the day. The men who had wealth and power wore wigs, powdered wigs. He would just wear his regular hair, wearing a nightshirt and some slippers. Be like, hey, welcome to the White House. What's up? All right. So he wanted to lessen the formality. Okay. So it's funny though, because Thomas Jefferson, in an effort to weaken the power of the federal government and to make the states, have states' rights and help agriculture instead of manufacturing, it's almost as though he's compelled by an evil twin, because he wants to do those things, but how much of that actually gets accomplished? None of it. In fact, he accomplishes the exact opposite. He is a president who is consistently inconsistent. Consistently inconsistent. Now, I'm not saying that he's a hypocrite. It's not that he's saying one thing and doing another. He's just kind of a victim of circumstance. He's a victim of circumstance. So, his theories did not always work out differently in practical politics. He wants a strict interpretation of the Constitution. If it's not in there, we can't do it. This is a guy that doubles the size of our nation by purchasing Louisiana. Where in the Constitution is that allowed? Does it say anywhere in the Constitution that the president can purchase land from foreign countries? No. So according to Thomas Jefferson's logic and his theory, is he allowed to do that? It's unconstitutional according to him. But it happens, okay? And it was a good thing it happened, okay? So, he was a good politician. He was able to accomplish a lot of things, in his informal atmosphere. So he did, he was a Jeffersonian, so he preferred the French over the British. So he always had French wine and French food. But as far as formality, he lessened that. Okay, all right. So toward the end of John Adams' presidency, we have to talk about the Judiciary Act of 1801. All right, so I have John Adams and John Marshall up there. The Judiciary Act of 1801 takes effect before Thomas Jefferson is president. All right? Because he becomes president in March 4th, 1801. The Judiciary Act of 1801 was one of the last pieces of legislation passed by the Federalist Congress. What it does is it created 16 new federal judge positions and judicial offices, which is allowed. That is totally allowable for the federal government to create courts. There's nothing abnormal about that, okay? However, the timing of this is a little bit conspicuous because it was done on, in order for, what happens in order for a bill to become a law? What's the last step? What's the last step of a bill becoming a law? It has to be signed by who? By the president, okay? If it's a federal law. If it's a state law, it has to be signed by the governor. This is a federal law. And John Adams signed this into law at 9 p.m. on the last day he was in office. So he was literally going to not be in president in less than 12 hours. And he's signing bills into law. So all of these 16 new positions that get created, they're called the midnight judges. That's what they're referred to as, the midnight judges. Due to, the late hour and the last day of John Adams' office of being president. Now, what political party? Now that means that these 16 new judges, who gets to appoint judges? Who appoints federal judges? In checks and balances, whose job is it to appoint judges? The executive branch, the president. What political party is John Adams? Federalist. Do you think he's going to choose judges that are Federalists? Yes. In essence, this is court packing. Court packing, okay? And he packs the courts with Federalist judges. Now, the thing about a judge, when you're a federal judge, how long do you get to be that judge? Till you die. These are lifetime positions. So, packing the federal courts with Federalist judges and with lifetime posts, they're very anti-Jeffersonian. So does this seem a bit like Federalist trickery? A little bit underhanded? Does it seem that way to you guys? Yeah, maybe a little bit, okay? The Jeffersonians say that it's just an outright defiance of the people's will. The people have spoken, and the people have elected Jeffersonians to be leaders. And for the Federalists to openly defy the will of the people is insulting to the American people. So, anyway, so Jefferson, whenever he becomes president, like the next day, and he sees this Judiciary Act of 1801 and all these court positions being packed with Federalists, well, he's the president of the United States. What does he determine to do? What does he determine to do? He just dismisses them. You're fired. Don't show up. Don't even bother. Okay? We don't need 16 new positions. He just dismisses them. Well, one of those judges, whose name is William Marbury, he was one of the midnight judges. He was going to be the new federal justice for the District of Columbia. And when William Marbury learned that his judge position, his commission, was being set aside, he sues. And the person whom he sues is the Secretary of State, whose job it is to deliver presidential appointments. Okay? And that time, the president's, the Secretary of State for President Jefferson was James Madison. And so the court case is called Marbury versus Madison. This is probably the most famous Supreme Court case in American history. And I'm sure you guys have all heard of it, right? Okay, at least heard of it. So, James Madison is the Secretary of State. He's being sued by William Marbury for not carrying out his order to fulfill this judge position under the Judiciary Act of 1801. So he said, William Marbury says, I'm supposed to be a judge. I was appointed by the president, and you did not deliver my appointment. So I'm suing you. Okay? That is what William Marbury is arguing. All right, so it starts in lesser courts, and they're unable to decide. And eventually it goes to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, also known as SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. Okay, so the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time was a man by the name of John Marshall. You ever heard of Marshall University? That guy. Okay, so John Marshall, he is a Federalist. And he actually serves as the Chief Justice for like 40 more years. And he's like the last, and it's really important that he's the Chief Justice because he's very influential in increasing the power of the federal government because he is a Federalist who believes in strong central authority. Okay? But John Marshall greatly magnified the authority of the court and really slaps the Jeffersonians with his decision. Basically, it doesn't really matter if Marbury, he's a footnote in history. What the important thing that comes out of this case is the principle of judicial review. It's nowhere in the Constitution that says the Supreme Court has the authority to determine a law unconstitutional. It doesn't say that. But a precedent is set in Marbury versus Madison, and it says that the Supreme Court has the authority to determine if a law is constitutional or unconstitutional, that the Supreme Court has the last word. And so it makes the Supreme Court a very powerful, influential organization. And so when when a justice needs to be appointed, it's a really big deal because the Supreme Court is a pretty powerful organization. And it is one of the branches of government. All right? So the idea of judicial review is established out of this court case. That's what's most important. The establishment of the principle of judicial review. Okay? Okay. So that's about 26 minutes worth, so we'll stop there. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to, you can hit me up. For now, you can write me a message on Schoology or an email.